Sure who else is coming. It's very close to the holidays, so people may have conflicts. But I'll give people another minute and then we'll start talking about your question, Blood. Can you hear me? I'll start my recording. Okay, well, let's go ahead and look at your question. You ask, where can a meditator find guidance on how to practice after attaining first path? I'm familiar with the 10 fetters model, but it only describes what should be overcome at certain stages, not exactly how. Are there any resources with specific practices for higher paths which you can recommend? Or is it enough to continue practicing as usual with having an intention to work on specific fetters? For example, just practicing after stream entry with an intention to reduce desire and aversion in daily life. Or are there some particular practices one could do? Okay, this is it's a good question. Yes, it's one worth talking about. On the one hand, there isn't a lot of specific guidance for what you do when you're on first path to attain second path, what you do on second path to attain third, so on and so forth. That doesn't exist. One of my projects that I'm working on is a book dealing with this more specifically, you know, providing some guidance, trying to help the meditator have a better overall grasp of what it means to develop the various things that we refer to as insight, the various knowledges, understandings, the forms of wisdom that we call insight, their relationship to the 10 fetters and the way that process unfolds. And I intend to approach this much the same way I did in TMI, is by providing the overall picture framework for that, rather than providing a specific set of practices, you know, as sort of a rote formula, to give the meditator an opportunity to use a variety of practices that suit them best for what they're trying to do. And, you know, I do feel like this is something that is really important to have out there and isn't out there right now. So that's why I'm doing it. So in terms of what there is, the 10 fetters are actually they're a more effective guide than you might think. But not if you focus on, okay, these are the fetters that fall away with first path. This is what happens with attainment of second path. Let me put my microscope or my magnifying glass on what happens second path. They're far more effective in helping you understand how to practice and how to direct your practice if first you look at the whole 10 fetters and the 4 paths in their entirety. And you get an idea of where this whole journey is going and how it unfolds. The second thing that is useful to do once you've kind of got a feel for the overall journey here is to ask yourself, okay, why these divisions and why these fetters with these divisions? Because to focus on, well, how do I get from first path to second path? It helps if you have an idea where second path fits in terms of third path and fourth path as well, and in terms of first path and where you are now, right? For example, if you look at second path in terms of the fetters, it's the fetters of desire and aversion are attenuated at second path. They're not gone. That's really important in terms of understanding what you're trying to do with second path. With third path, desire and aversion for things of the sense realm are gone. So first, they're greatly weakened. Then there's a distinctly different path associated with the falling away of desire and aversion, but not desire and aversion totally, desire and aversion of the sense realm. So getting this bigger picture, then when you go back and you look at, okay, what is it exactly that I'm trying to get in touch with, the second path, right? And how then can I direct my practice for that? And then, of course, broaden your scope beyond just looking at the 10 fetters. The Buddha offered practices. He offered anapanasati, he offered jhana, he offered the satipatthana. How do those practices relate to the fetters and the four paths? He gave an overall description in the form of the Four Noble Truths. How does that apply to second path and third path and fourth path? Well, first path, second path, third and fourth. What understanding can you gain on how to practice to achieve second path by looking at the Four Noble Truths? Well, right away, does something strike you? I mean, you understand what the first truth was and second truth, third truth. And I presume you understand the fetters associated with first path and the changes associated with second and third path. Do you see any correlations in that yourself?
Me? Yeah, I mean, I'm asking it right now in theory, but I think that it relates to the deeper understanding of the same truths. It goes deeper and deeper, same insights. Ultimately, no self, right?
Well, second truth is that the cause of dukkha, of the kind of dukkha that can be eliminated. First truth tells us there's a kind of dukkha that's always going to be there. But there's another kind of dukkha, and it's the one that is the most disruptive to our well-being, both individually and collectively in terms of what we do to each other. There's a second kind of dukkha that can be eliminated. And the second truth tells us the cause of that is desire and aversion. Second path is the great attenuation of desire and aversion. What is the key to achieving this attenuation of desire and aversion? Well, it would seem to be a very deep understanding of the relationship between unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and the desire and aversion that are creating them, right? Okay, so let's look at dukkha. Dukkha, its opposite is sukha, unsatisfactoriness, dissatisfactoriness, uh, unpleasantness, and the opposite of that is pleasantness. And well, what did the Buddha in other places? What did he say about the sukha? He described it as having several different forms, some much more sublime than others. There is that gross sensory pleasure, that's one level, but then there are these more sublime levels of pleasure. And in terms of sukha, there's the at easeness, the absence of that dissatisfactoriness or the attenuation of that dissatisfactoriness. It's a more sublime kind of sukha. Getting what you want produces a kind of sukha, but so does not wanting anything, right? What practices did the Buddha offer that can allow you to understand this dukkha, and of course its opposites, these various degrees of sublime sukha that correspond to the falling away of this dukkha, this unsatisfactoriness? How about the second of the Satipatthanas? You familiar with what that one is?
Second, sorry, could you repeat?
The second of the Satipatthanas. It is mindfulness of feelings which are defined by the Buddha as pleasant, unpleasant, and neither.
Vedana, right?
Right, Vedana, you got
Vedana,
it.
Yeah.
It's pleasant, unpleasant. Isn't this what decreasing dukkha is about? Isn't this where these sublime forms of sukha that arise as there is less of that dukkha present? Doesn't this hone in on exactly how you know there is less desire and aversion in your mind?
In a way, yeah.
Right, yeah. So that's a practice that's worth doing. Now, once again, let's look at desire and aversion. They're kind of a mental state, are they not?
They are.
Right. So they're a mental state that is directly related to feelings, the Vedanas. Well, if you look at the third Satipatthana, this is where it gets a little bit confusing because of what's said about it. But you just look at the third Satipatthana. What is it? It's you're looking at mental states as mental states. Isn't that where you would find the craving and the desire? Now, the way it's described, if you just look at what the third Satipatthana is identified as, it holds a lot of the answer. It can be a little confusing if you look at the description that follows that, because the only mental states that are described are those that occur in meditation. There's more distraction or less distraction, so on and so forth. But does that not actually hold a key in terms of practice? If you become aware of the mental states that you experience in practice, and you look at why is there more agitation at sometimes than others? Why is there more dullness at sometimes than others? Why is there more clarity of understanding at sometimes than others? So you tell me, do you see where this kind of relates back to the other things we've already looked at?
Could you clarify what is Satipatthana? Is this links of dependent arising or five aggregates?
Applications of mindfulness. Sati is the word that gets translated as mindfulness, and patthana means to apply something to something. Okay, so you're applying your mindfulness. The first of the Satipatthanas in the Satipatthana Sutta is mindfulness of the body in and as the body. Second is mindfulness of feelings, Vedana, as Vedana. Third is mindfulness of mental states, as mental states. And the fourth is mindfulness of mental formations or these sort of larger scale views and understanding as views and understanding, or as mental constructs as mental constructs. Okay. So I'm just trying to point out to you that there is guidance in this and existence, but you have to do some work to put the pieces together. It is there. And I'm going to try to help people by just showing them, the way over just a space of a few minutes, I'm kind of helping you to maybe see this. So you can see that if you examine this from the larger perspective, it begins to make more sense. Then you can look at the larger perspective, by the way. I mean, the Buddha's teachings as a whole. What are all the different things that he taught about that seem to be related to this in one way or another? Look at the various meditations that he offered. Oh, how do these relate to it? Now, hopefully, you can follow me on this and you can see how, well, there isn't a complete absence of information. There is guidance. And in a way, it's the best kind. It's not do this and then this happens. So then you do this and then that happens. That's a pretty limited kind of advice. This is more of how do you understand and put the whole picture together so that you can choose your practices on any one day to direct them towards the goal that you're working towards. It would help, I hope it will help to have this articulated a little more specifically, but the information is there. And it applies, you know, the same thing with third and fourth path as well. There's one thing that occurred to me when I was reading your question, and I'd like to go back to first path, because, well, let me just check and see if what it seemed to me, and you can confirm or otherwise this, it seemed to me there was a certain assumption that there's a lot of information on how to practice to achieve first path. Is that what you felt at the time you wrote this question?
Yeah. I was thinking about all the books that teach how to reach awakening and mind illuminated. I was getting a feeling that they lead to the first path, and there was not enough information about the higher path. Maybe it's a bias.
There's a different kind of obscuration there. In terms of second, third, and fourth path, there's a dearth of information. In terms of first path, there's a surfeit. And what do they all say? They all say, this is the way, and this is the best way, and you can ignore all those other ways. You can ignore all those other hundreds of ways. You can ignore all those completely different traditions, right? If you just like the preacher that preaches his way, and you say, well, yeah, this is the way, I'll take it. You limited yourself greatly. On the other hand, if you open yourself up and say, well, maybe there's maybe all of these other ways have some validity or something. But if they do, how do I choose? Because everybody says their way is the best way. Just because I happen to come across this one particular teacher come preacher who says that they have the best way, and because I like the way they talk, yes, I can just disregard all the rest. Well, maybe that'll work for you. I guess if the person you're listening to has indeed achieved first path or higher, and if you're similar to them enough, and if your mindset and your experience and everything is similar enough to theirs, then probably their way will work. But there's an awful lot of ifs in there, right? If you look at the bigger picture and you say, okay, there's all these ways, how do I tell what is the best way for me? Now you're left with as big a mystery as you were with the dearth of information for second, third, and fourth path. So basically, everything that I said about what you can do in terms of second, third, and fourth path would apply to first path as well. The only thing is you have a confusing plethora of possibilities that are out there, and you'll have to sort through them. But the same principles, well, what is this overall trajectory? Why is first path characterized by the particular fetters being overcome that it is? What are those fetters in terms of the larger context of the Buddha's teaching? Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, all of the other teachings along the way. What are the practices that the Buddha offered to us, like Anapanasati and Satipatthana and the different ones? What do they offer in terms of specifically the falling away of those fetters and specifically the maturation of those components of wisdom, understanding, knowledge that characterize first path. So what do you think?
Yeah, I guess it clarified some points for me. So if I understood correctly, so right now the best source would be the suttas, yeah, and to analyze them, to think for myself, don't just blindly follow anyone, just see the bigger picture. Yeah, I think I got that. And I would like to ask you, how is the progress on the book you're writing?
Well, there's been a few impediments to my continuing my work on it, but those are rapidly falling away, and I'm going to be able to dive into it. And the time that's passed, I may not have been putting a lot of words to paper, but it's been gestating in my mind as I've been dealing with other things, and I have a whole lot more clarity on the best way to present it. And I'm going to I get to bring that to the paper now that these other things are giving me more space.
Glad to hear that.
Hopefully it will come to fruition quickly. Although quickly is very relative, isn't it? And it may be a bit presumptuous for me to think that new impediments to my work might not arise, but I'm going to do my best to keep that from happening. This is one of the most important things that I have left to do in my life, the books that I'm working on.
Good luck with the book. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any comments that they'd like to make on what we've talked about? Because otherwise, I will go ahead with Pasquale's questions and then open the floor up to anyone who has questions, okay? Okay. So Pasquale has two questions. I was wondering if there's any difference between surrendering, as you sometimes mentioned, and letting all effort go to attain effortlessness, as you describe in stage 7. I'm just curious because as I continue to practice in stage 6, I am attempting to make it a part of my intention to strive less for goals and just do the practice for its own sake, or at least keeping in mind the underlying purpose, developing one-pointed stable attention. This led me to wonder if there's any difference between these two letting goes. I don't mean abandoning goals, but the striving part. Well, both the letting go of striving and the surrendering to what is and the way things are they're fundamentally the same process. But what makes them, to the degree that they're different, it is the applications of that same process and the degree to which you have succeeded in refining that process of surrendering, letting go, acceptance, patience. There's all kinds of ways that you could describe it, okay? The most fundamental aspect of it is letting go of that sense that you are in control of what happens, that you are the agent that is making things happen, that the more effort you put into it, the more quickly what you want to happen is going to happen. The feeling that you can and should and must do something and try harder, strive, etc., and so on. Okay. That's the fundamental thing you're letting go of. This fundamental thing is an important aspect of the sense of self. There's really, we can deconstruct the self as being the self as the experiencer of what happens, and the self as the doer, the agent. Okay? This is all primarily focused on letting go of that attachment to the self as the doer, as the agent. But it is larger than that. It does include letting go of the self as the experiencer as well. So what you're surrendering to is that there is no self that this is either happening to or who is making it happen. Okay. And one of the things that can lead to, in terms of a mistaken interpretation, is this means that this whole self thing is bad and needs to be beaten down and crushed, and that doesn't work either. It's just letting go of the attachment to it. Okay, so there's this sense that I have to do something. Well, how do I tame it? Well, I'm going to do these practices, and you addressed this. You said, just do the practice for its own sake. Well, I'm going to do these practices. I have faith that they will lead to the result. So I'm not going to worry about making it happen. I'm going to just hold this intention to do the practice in the belief that doing the practice will produce the result. Right? So that's a good, healthy kind of letting go. Elizabeth.
Yeah, and Pasquale's here too, but just to add one thing, this is like stage 6 to 7, and you're talking about what the purpose being developing a one-pointed stable attention, but the purpose is also to develop awareness. And that when you can relax into that awareness, a lot of this perspective shifts along with that shift from attention to that shift to awareness. So this not having to do, not being capable of doing, there's no one to do. Awareness feels very much like that. Mm-hmm. So part of it is, I think, not just the focus on the self, but the focus on the reason I want attention to rest stably on something is that when it does, I can really become much more, I can look at awareness. I can become aware that it's there. I can relax into it and let that be what I come from, as opposed to always coming from attention the way I've trained myself over years and decades. And so it's there's kind of a dual goal. The one-pointed attention is what we use in order to be able to notice lots of things about awareness that are hidden when attention is bopping around, and that's the only thing we notice. And when attention can rest on one thing, then all of a sudden, all this whole other world opens up.
You jumped ahead of me, Elizabeth. Right, because that was the next thing.
I'm sure you would get there eventually.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, particularly where you said you were referring to for example, jhana, and the underlying purpose, developing one-pointed stable attention. That's not the underlying purpose. The underlying purpose is for attention to train attention so that it becomes an effective means to the end rather than an obstacle in the way of the end. Okay. So if you look at jhana, attention is important in access concentration. Attention is a significant part of first jhana. Attention has nothing to do with second, third, and fourth jhana. None at all. It's gone, essentially, or it's present in a completely different form. But the only way to have access concentration, and the only way to achieve the stable first jhana, is if attention behaves itself, if attention stops just running around and doing what it's always been doing, because you can't have a stable first jhana if attention is going to start popping off doing its own thing and co-opting all of your conscious power, right? You can't even enter the jhana until you've stabilized attention sufficiently that it's not chasing after objects of desire and aversion and all of the other hindrances, right?
Mm.
So the training of attention in stable, focused behavior is a means to an end. And so what is the quality of consciousness when attention does become stable? We kind of saw that right from first beginning to meditate in TMI, is that, yeah, attention can take off, take over, and you're not even meditating anymore, right?
Right.
As attention becomes more trained to behave itself more, not try to run the show all the time, what do you have? This expanding awareness that becomes increasingly metacognitive. That's what second, third, and fourth jhanas are about. And it is when your attention plays an appropriate role and allows metacognitive awareness to be the dominant mode of consciousness that stages 8, 9, and 10 are allowed to unfold. Make sense?
Yeah. I had, like when you mentioned, it just kind of popped into my mind when you mentioned about that that our experience as being the perceiver or the doer, right? That there is no self and so on. Any of that is that something that you sort of keep in the back of your mind as you do this practice, like as you're practicing, or is that just, you've intellectualized it, you thought about it, made sense, but you're not bringing that to your practice. You just left it, and your practice is one thing, and you already understand what you've thought about. Do you know what I mean? Instead of bringing all these, I'm just thinking like because I do tend to think of, okay, there is no me that is, I can't try to make anything happen. I can just intend. And then, so the idea that there is somebody in control is not really there, but I don't want it to being too much of a concept I'm bringing with me, that becomes a problem. Then I start thinking instead of practicing.
Yes.
Like
yes.
How much of that do you bring into your practice?
You don't need to decide to bring any of it into the practice. If you have thought, if outside of your sitting practice, you have read and listened and thought about this, then that conceptual framework will exist in your mind. You don't need to bring it into your practice. It's going to be, your whole mind is there. And so all of its contents are there. So that's there. And when the time is appropriate, it's available. What you want your practice to do is not, the approach is not, there is no doer in this. So I've got to get rid of the doer. It's the other way around. You do the practice, and the practice shows you, and you have the experience of, oh, there really isn't a doer, is there? Oh, wow. You let it show you. If you set out to find it, you're just going to find the mental constructs that you already formed earlier. And if you jump to those, then you might as well think about it, because it's not going to take you any further. But no, don't think about it. I'm not suggesting that you do. I'm just saying that instead, the practice, it's open. Okay, what is happening? And I'm not going to expect anything in particular to happen, but when it does, I'll recognize it because I've thought about it. I'll have a conceptual framework to put it into. It'll be, oh my gosh, I'm not in control. oh my gosh, when I try to be in control, it creates problems. Yeah. It's that kind of discovery.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah, and as far as goals, it's much the same way with the goals. You have your goals to the degree that you understand them in the form that they'll take. They're there. They'll always be a part of that in your mind, but hold them gently in terms of, well, they might not be exactly the way I imagine them to be, but as I say, the mental construct associated with those goals is already present in your mind. So let go of the idea of this is where I'm going to get to, and my current understanding of what that is like is 100% accurate. Because the one thing I can guarantee you is that you'll discover that it wasn't accurate. At the very best, it was a two-dimensional representation, right? So you want to discover it, and you want to discover that goal through the realization of it, not through the projection of it.
Right.
And having the understanding of more or less where you're going is an extremely valuable thing. The first part of the Eightfold Path is right understanding. Then you've got the right understanding. You just let it be there. You just let it hang out in the fringes of your mind while you do the practice. And lo and behold, it becomes much more than an intellectual understanding, a conceptual understanding. But it serves its purpose. So that's the way to handle goals. So you think you know what the goal is, but ultimately you don't really, not until you've experienced it. Once, you know. Okay. Anything further you'd like to ask, or that anybody else would like to comment on that before we look at your second question?
I think it's very important what you said, because about actually observing and not thinking about it in the moment, because I have such an instinct usually that I always, to understand it, I have to bring it up constantly intellectually, even while doing insight practices. But I think it's very helpful that you said it just stays in the mind, and when the time will be right, you just observe and the mind will make the connection itself, right? So that's the way to do it, not to bring it up intentionally, right?
That's right. Because that's just, bringing it up intentionally is just, it's another part of feeling like you're the one that's going to make it happen, or that you have to do something to make it happen.
That's right.
You're bringing this fictional, powerful self into the picture and saying, oh, me as a self, I'm going to make this happen by pulling up these conceptual formations. It only gets in the way. It only obscures the process.
Okay.
I'll just point out another aspect of this too. It has to do with the fact that until we've experienced them, our understanding of the goal is not as clear as we think it is. What happens when we have that experience and it doesn't fit with what we thought it was? Now, there's two possibilities here. One is we can be completely open to changing our conceptual understanding to incorporate the actual experience and what we've learned from the experience. The other one is to judge our experience as being more adequate or less adequate based on how well it matches our pre-existing conceptual understanding. Now, just on the basis of this conversation, I'm sure you'll see that one answer makes more sense than the other, right? But that is not necessarily how we tend to respond to these things. We can become very attached to our understanding of what we think it's going to be like to achieve the goal. whatever the goal is. Okay, with any goal, we can become so attached to the idea that, okay, I understand what this is going to be like, that when it turns out to be different than that, we reject the experience in favor of this notion that we cling to. And that has to be another part of your conceptual understanding, is that nothing is going to turn out to be the way I thought it was, because however I think it is only my best approximation based on the state of ignorance and understanding that I had when I formed it. There's sort of a more general principle here. The more you truly understand, the more you realize how much you don't understand. The more you feel certain, the more you are caught in falsehoods. Yes. So, the greatest wisdom is knowing what you don't know and not being attached to what you think you know.
The value of beginner's mind.
That's right. Beginner's mind. No matter where you are, you're still a beginner. And remember that. No matter how well you think you understand things today, there's going to come a point in the future where you understand them much, much better. And when you look back, you'll say, oh my goodness, if I'd only known. But from that vantage point, you'll also be much less likely to attach to your current understanding as being ultimate. And this too will pass away, to be replaced by something even better. So look at the second part of Pasquale's question. Gondro practices. These are, as I'm sure you know, these are preliminary practices that prepare the mind, prepare the practitioner for those practices that are to come. They are very powerful and they are very useful. They also can become a source of attachment. So in terms of your question, which I think your question is, should I do more of these because I really liked them and I found them valuable. So should I immerse myself in the preliminary practices again? Is that your question?
It's sort of like, how do I put this? Like if everything that every tool that one would need is encompassed in TMI, or let's say the Lojong practice that I do or something, then, that's fine. But if there's something useful out of practices like the Nundro, would it even be worth it to do? I guess I come from a place I sort of enjoyed it, but there's always that maybe it is kind of a clinging issue that I feel like, I should be doing this because there's something important behind it. But then there's also other stuff that's like, what you can develop as a practitioner is contained in other practices. You don't need everything, because I don't really know exactly what. I think you know where I'm going with this. Like everything's contained in a certain package of practices. You don't have to have everything.
Yes. Well, that is true. You don't have to have everything. On the other hand, feel free to bring anything else in that helps you to achieve that. The form that the Dondro practices are addressed in TMI, which can encompass everything, is you have to look at what purpose do the Gondro practices serve? Why did it become an important part of certain traditions to do this as a preliminary to the other practices? You see how it shapes the mind in the ways we were talking about earlier here. You surrender to those practices, right? You immerse yourself in them. And there is exactly that kind of letting go that we were talking about. When you do let go, it is profoundly satisfying. So it produces a state of mind that you could become attached to. And that's not a good reason for doing more of those practices. On the other hand, it is training you to let go, to surrender, to do the practice. You know, how could doing all of these mantra recitations and these what do you call it,
the prostrations,
and things like that, you have to let go of questions like, okay, what is, is this some kind of magic ritual that's going to produce a result? Is it, what is this all about? What this is all about is bringing you to the place of you just do the practice. So that when you go to those higher practices, you bring that with you. You'll just do the practice. You'll just go into it. You'll let it happen. You'll stop questioning, am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? Should I be doing this instead? Should I be doing something else? Well, prostrations are pretty darn simple. There's not a lot of room for, am I doing this right or not?
Yeah. I think when I look back on doing some of the practices, is that it seems like as I'm doing TMI, I see a lot of overlap. And it seems like these can help to produce positive states of mind. Like, there's sort of a lot of confessing as well, like all the negative things you've done. You're trying to get rid of a lot of negative states and increase the positive states. And it seems to be something useful to do, to kind of go into your meditation with a happy mind. And so, I mean, for me, it seems that's the usefulness out of it. Like, I don't do it every day, but sometimes certain feeling of, I want to do this to kind of get a boost. But beyond that, I just didn't know what else to think about it, to see if there's anything beyond that, the usefulness of it. So,
well, I think you're totally on the right track. Yeah, okay. You understand it. It produces a valuable state of mind. You can do the same thing, not doing those practices and just looking for the joy. And when you find yourself moving into a negative state of mind, recognizing, identifying as such, and just letting go of that tendency to attach to the negative. Instead, look for the positive. But the Gondro practices are doing the same thing, and in a sense, in a more physically active, but more passive in terms of the doer. You're not making it happen. It happens as a result of the practice. So it is very valuable. It is extremely valuable, but it's not valuable just because of the way it makes you feel. It's valuable because how those mental states are conducive to maximizing the benefit of the higher practices. So by all means, use it. You've discovered a wonderful thing. You don't need to give it up. But at the same time, it's only a part. It's only another means to the greater end.
Of course, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy those practices as well. It's a thing of being introduced to Kagyu-oriented approach to Buddhism. Is here's your mala, go at it. Here's your hand and knee pads, go at it. Okay. So, anybody else have any things that they'd like to talk about? Anyone? Yes, Bill.
I've been reading some books on polyvagal theory and polyvagal therapy for resolving trauma.
Mhm.
And one of the things they talk about is that in the animal world, after a animal goes into a freeze response, there's often coming out of it an agitation of some kind that releases this sort of suppressed energy, or that was in part of the suppressed energy that led to the immobilization. Do you know about polyvagal theory?
I can't say that I do. I mean, I've heard of it.
So a brief explanation is that the most primitive response to overwhelming threat,
Mhm.
when you feel, is that you play dead. And that actually, is phylogenetically the oldest. Then comes the adrenal response, which is the fight or flight. And the latest in the phylogenetic evolution is the ventral vagus, which is tied in with the muscles of facial expression, and so are related to communication between individuals.
Mhm.
And that trauma usually occurs before the age of 5, when your reaction to emotional situations gets imprinted by either imitating or reacting to those of your caregivers.
Mhm.
And that oftentimes when we have these strong outbursts of behavior, they're related to the uncovering of these implicit reactions that we don't have a story as to how they arose,
Mhm.
but they're just these remembered reactions. So my question was, is it possible that these things of piti, the sensations that arise with meditation, might also be a form of the same kind of agitation that releases this pent-up energy? Because it does have this sort of agitating or bubbling kind of nature to it. And another question that's sort of related to this is, how would you say that piti differs from the opening of a chakra, or when it feels like like the heart opens or some other chakra opens?
So, well, as far as your first question, what you said that polyvagal theory says does make sense to me. Your first question was, though, is PT perhaps something very similar? I immediately recognize that they are similar processes, but I think to try to reduce one to the other would be a big mistake. They are similar processes. PT is occurring on more levels than autonomic responses. Now, when you were describing polyvagal theory, I was relating this to my understanding as a physiologist and neurophysiologist of the behavior of the autonomic nervous system. It has the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side, which is the vagal is referring to. What is important is not the degree of activation of either. Well, it's important, but what manifests in terms of the individual is the balance between the two. Autonomic tone. You can have a situation where parasympathetic activity is reduced and sympathetic activity is elevated. And this is your classic kind of fight or flight response. But one of the things that happens is somebody who's in a chronic state of sympathetic arousal is that the body will compensate by raising the parasympathetic arousal, so that now it seems as though the autonomic nervous system is normalized backwards and down here, but it's not. What's happened is sympathetic activity remains elevated, but now parasympathetic has matched it. So now they are balancing each other out, but you're in a hyper state of sympathetic arousal and a hyper state of parasympathetic arousal at the same time. This is the state that causes all of these physiological problems in the body, because it overflows into all of these other systems, and it causes various kinds of damage. And so all of the stress-related physiological symptoms that or syndromes that arise out of that, the impaired immune function, the damage to arterial walls leading to advanced arterial sclerosis and things like that. So when you talk about in polyvagal theory, that agitation that results, yeah, when the parasympathetic arousal goes down, then once again, you're in a state of sympathetic arousal and you have to wait for that to go down. So that's that agitation. I see there's very parallel processes going on here. But when we're talking about PT, we're talking about more levels within the nervous system than just the parasympathetic. And that is why, like the not the parasympathetic, the autonomic. The autonomic is a simpler system that evolved much in advance of the rest of the nervous system. But the rest of the nervous system is going to behave in parallel ways. PT is an expression of, I would say in answer to your question, that PT is a very similar manifestation, expression of there being a very high state of activity which is uncovered and becomes available. So there's a definite parallel. Similar processes, it seems very likely that similar processes are involved. But to reduce one to the other would be a mistake, because PT involves many more levels in the hierarchy of the nervous system than just the autonomic. So there's a lot to be learned about PT from examining these behaviors of the autonomic nervous system, but not to equate them.
I guess in the polyvagal theory, it's not so much that it's just limited to the idea of the autonomic nervous system, but how other behaviors get locked into that without our knowing that we have these habitual reactions.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did understand that.
But I would not try to equate the two. I'm just curious about the comparison of those.
Well, yeah, I think they're very similar, and I think a lot could be learned by examining each in the light of the other. Yes, and it would be likewise another oversimplification if I were to say polyvagal theory is only talking about the autonomic nervous system, because what the autonomic nervous system does is going to affect everything else. It's going to affect the relative balance of neurotransmitters in every part of the nervous system, right? So, yeah. As far as the similarity with opening of chakras and things like that, yes, absolutely. I know I haven't had the time and the opportunity to pursue this as deeply as I would like to, so I'm always encouraging other people to look more deeply into it. But the phenomenon of PT has so many similarities to the idea of the flow of energy in the Ida and Pingala and the central canal and the opening of the chakras and all this. It's all right there, as is all other energetic phenomena and practices. The various practices that involve working with qi and the Tibetan inner winds and the winds and the drops. I think these all are looking at the same phenomenon from different directions. If anything, PT, Kundalini yoga, well, not PT, I would say the Qi practices, Kundalini yoga, chakras, winds and drops are much more sophisticated and focused approaches to these. PT is kind of a vague description based on what happens, but without a lot of, well, what do you do with it? How do you work with it? It's just sort of, yeah, it happens. It'll take care of itself. Don't worry about it. And I much prefer the idea of, hey, we've got something important happening here. How can we approach it more effectively than just, hey, it happens? How can we use it? Can we use it? And that's what I think these other practices are addressing. That the PT approach is much more sort of a, well, we don't have time to worry about that. We're doing something more important. And I think that's a mistake.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody have anything else on the mind?
How's your health, Culadasa?
Well, in several ways, it's improved recently. I wish I had a clearer idea of why it's improved or why it got worse. I feel a lot more reassured by the improvement I'm seeing if I understood why it had happened. But I'm able to eat real food to a much greater degree. I still have to rely a lot on insure supplements and things like that. And I'm holding my weight, but I'm not at the point of gaining weight. During the times of day when my energy is good, I have more energy and I can get more done. But there's still, that part of the day isn't as long as I would like it to be. I have a lot of other things that I need to look into, and I have appointments with specialists this month to hopefully find out a little bit more about what's going on. Basically, I feel like, what is going on? I don't know. I can't, I have a background in physiology, and I try to interpret what's happening in my body as best I can, but I keep coming up with, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand this. What does this mean? And so I'm hoping the cardiologist I'm seeing on the 4th and the pulmonologist I'm seeing and all these other people are going to give me the answer. I've got an appointment with a neurologist at last because I've developed a variety of sensory neuropathies that I don't know what they're about. So
This is in relationship to the metastatic lung cancer?
I wish I knew. It's the only thing that I know of, that it could be in relationship to the lung cancer and to the treatment for the lung cancer.
Right, right.
But that's the only things I know about. But the reason I'm seeing these other specialists is there something else going on that I don't know about?
Undoubtedly.
Well, undoubtedly, yes. I know that for certain. What I don't know is whether they'll be able to tell me what it is. Yeah.
Just curious on the same topic. I was listening to one podcast when you were discussing bio-emotive framework in relation to health, that there was some self-destructive belief that you had, and which was eating you from the inside. And I'm still curious, do you still explore bio-emotive framework therapy, or do you just do therapy at all, or have you found it helpful for the health? Something
I
like
have
that.
found it helpful, and I have continued. I continue to work with the same person, and it continues to be helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you describe that kind of a process?
Well, yes. Maybe I could describe part of the process that I went through not too long ago with this person. Is he was asking me questions about what was happening with my health. One of the problems that I had quite often in the past, and has continued until I did that, and I haven't had that problem, but it's a difficulty exhaling. Sometimes having just a lot of air hunger because I just feel like, respiratory distress, because I just, I end up taking really deep breaths and then exhaling forcefully because it will seem like it opens up my airways and I can breathe more easily for a little while. So we started this process of, I would just get into that feeling. He would suggest various phrases that I could repeat until something emerged that really sounded right. And what we ended up, we started working in a direction that formed, which is, it's like there was something held inside that I couldn't get rid of. You can see the parallel with difficulty on exhalation. It was something that I was holding on to. What was the quality of it? Well, it was painful. There was some kind of pain that I was holding on to, or at least that's the way it kind of emerged in this process of going into the feeling, repeating phrases. Does it fit? Does it not fit? How can it be changed to fit better? Okay. And kind of what emerged from that was this feeling that I was holding on to something, but I couldn't let go of. Why couldn't I let go of it? Well, there was fear. What was the fear? The fear was that this pain had given me a kind of inner ability to resolve to do something, and then I would overcome all obstacles to do that. And I have overcome so many obstacles in my life on the basis of that, that the fear that I would lose that if I let go of the pain that had given rise to that. Well, as soon as I found myself articulating this, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. And I have not had that particular form of respiratory distress since. I can do deep breathing exercises, which have really brought this out. I started doing Wim Hof breathing exercises, and I'd reach a point where I just couldn't go any further because I just couldn't let the air out. Now I can do those, no problem. I can do that for 5 minutes. And so that's sort of an example of the way this process works. I would highly recommend it. It's extremely powerful. So
is it something
the other thing about this is
sorry.
It's much easier for me to talk about these painful instances in my childhood that gave rise to this. I used to have a reluctance and a reticence that I didn't even know what it was from. Now it's, hey, why not? There's no reason not to talk about it. No reason not to acknowledge it. No reason to, so.
Is it something which can be done individually, or does it require another person?
Well, my only experience of it, I wouldn't know how to go about doing this individually. Working with somebody who's done this a lot seems to be indispensable to me to the process. because they're picking up on all kinds of subtle cues, and they're not leading you towards anything. And that's a real skill, not to lead towards, not to have that idea, oh, I think this is where this is going, and so I'm going to lead you towards it. The only thing he does is, yeah, it looks like you're getting farther away from it. Try something else. You know, because there is a tendency, what I've seen in myself is the tendency to try to evade something that's getting to a place that's a little too sensitive. So, you know, his role is to say, I think you're getting off track. I'm not to tell me where on track is, but to be sensitive to when I'm getting, I'm getting off the track. That's the uncomfortable part of this. It is an uncomfortable process. It's because you keep getting steered back towards what is uncomfortable and what there is that you don't want to look at.
I guess I have a question that's been on my mind since the last Zoom meeting. I think somebody asked a few months ago about, they had a question about Naroda Samapati.
Yes.
And whether, I think it was whether somebody, when they come out of that, do they get to fourth path? I think it was something like this. And I just remember your response, something like you knew what you had to do, and you were, I was just curious if you had tried it out, if there was any, yeah.
No, I still haven't tried that out. That would be, you know, to go into a sort of suspended animation for several days or a week at a time is not something that I feel like I can afford to do at all right now. And it's, you know, yeah, that's I suppose if I had reason to believe that it would be sufficiently useful, I might be more motivated to make that happen. But at least from the degree of motivation I have right now, it seems like it's impossible for me to be able to, for one thing, to risk such a thing. So.
Yeah, probably something like the books is on the more beneficial. Finishing the books is more beneficial.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
It's certainly, it's doing more to keep me alive. Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good time to wish you all a happy new year and see what kinds of exciting things that there are for us to explore together in that new year. So. Best wishes to you all for the new year.
Same to you. Thank you.
Best wishes and love to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Best wishes.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
May this one be better than the last one. I am looking forward to my vaccination.
Yeah.
All right.
May it be better than the last four.
Yes, may it be better than the last four, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.